Hi and welcome to the Retail and Consumer Insight webinar that we have today. So the session is going to look at meat and dairy consumer trends, in particular how consumer confidence, the impact of the cost of living crisis and attitudinal data that we collect through meat and dairy is impacting consumption levels. We're also going to be picking out the key opportunities for these sectors, and in particular looking at some key promotional events and dates for the diary, looking at the impact that it has across meat and dairy and some of the opportunities that we see. We'll also have a session on some of the AHDB marketing work that's done, and also how that uses consumer insight and how that links into the sort of end targeting and some of the work that the marketing team have got lined up. So just to give you a little bit of an idea more about what we do as a team, we look at consumer attitudes and behaviours in the marketplace, looking at how consumers are thinking and behaving, and we also track it to consumers' consumption levels, both in store in the retail environment, but also in that out-of-home market. We also look at that kind of wider consumer landscape piece to look at some of the impact that we have across some of the reputational pieces. So looking at things like trust, transparency in the supply chain, environment, health, animal welfare. And we also work with both our domestic marketing team and our international export team to help really understand how consumers are acting and behaving. What I would say is the content that you're about to see will be about 45 minutes of content. There's lots more behind the scenes on the AHDB website. If some of the things are of interest, then go and take a little look on our web pages as well. And also, if there's any things that you see and hear from the team that you'd like to know a little bit more about, drop us an email, strategic.insight at ahdb.org.uk, and get in touch with a member of the team. We can by all means answer or help answer any questions. We also have a newsletter that you can subscribe to. We do a newsletter out every other month. It helps people just keep up to date with the latest trends in the marketplace. The reason why we do the things that we do as a team is to help the industry, our levy payers, but also wider stakeholders in the supply chain to understand how consumers are acting, how they're behaving, but also to help utilize any opportunities that are out there to harness and evolve and grow with the consumers to unleash some opportunities for the meat and dairy industry. So I'll be handing over to the first session, and that will be looking at the consumer confidence, consumer landscape, and then we'll have that further session on the kind of key promotional events, followed by a roundup of some of the AHDB marketing activities. So we hope you enjoy the webinar, and thank you very much for joining us and for tuning in. Thank you.
Thanks, Steve. So I'm Tom, a Retail and Consumer Insight Analyst at AHDB. And over the next 15 minutes or so, I'm going to take you through the consumer trends in meat and dairy consumption, and I'll have a little look at how this is impacted by consumer confidence and also by the cost of living. So next slide, please. So on this graph, we can see that consumer confidence started to rise in April, and this shows that consumers are feeling more positive about their finances and the wider economy for the coming year. So there's hope of a fall in interest rates as well. But that said, many consumers are still having to adjust to higher mortgage costs, so large changes in spending are still yet to be seen for the most part. Next slide. So as we've seen, with the cost of living easing slightly, household finances have steadied for many consumers. So we're starting to see some confidence come back to the market. So fewer consumers are having to try and save money, and this is slowly affecting behaviours. So more consumers are now trying new things and are fancying a change. Lunch meals are now also including more categories, so people are limiting the food they're eating less. And then since last summer, more meals are now being chosen for health reasons, and we often see health as a priority rise up the priority list as consumer confidence rises, which we saw earlier. But over half of consumers are still continuing cost-saving behaviours, so over half are reducing their spend on eating out, and a similar proportion are reducing the amount they spend on their weekly food shop. So really, consumers are still looking for the best value for money products, and shopper behaviour will take time to change, as we've had 3 years of challenges. But things are changing just quite slowly, so scratch and batch cooking are likely to remain popular, and consumers are still looking to treat themselves, but they may do so more within the home rather than going out to eat in order to save money. Next slide, please. And so because of the current economic conditions and shopper behaviour that I've touched on, consumers are weighing up variables like cost, quality and price with reputational factors. So at the moment, price is the most important thing, outweighing other factors, but speed and ease of cooking is also important to consumers. But with time, the environmental impact of food will become more of a priority for consumers, as well as welfare standards and the origin of products. So we might see this balance start to shift. And then on the next slide, so just coming on to meat and dairy reducers. So there are pockets of society that are limiting their consumption of meat and dairy. So the number of people reducing meat hasn't changed much recently and sits at 20%, but fewer people are actually cutting back on dairy, so that's at just 11% of consumers. And so for meat then, so the reducer levels are higher for consumers aged over 45, and actually this consumer group, so those aged over 45, account for over 70% of all meat, fish and poultry volume sales. So if there's any change or any loss in these shoppers within this age group, this could have an effect on meat and dairy volumes, mainly meat though. Next slide, please. And so there are differing priorities for those consumers who are cutting back on meat and dairy. So for meat reducers, the top reasons for reducing meat consumption are cost, health, and the environment. Now, animal welfare also features, but for dairy, it doesn't. But for dairy, cost doesn't feature as much. So consumers are more likely to be cutting back on dairy for health reasons. But cost as a key focus for reducing meat consumption is easing, and so going beyond cost, we start to see other reputational factors coming through. So consumers cutting back on meat for environmental and animal welfare reasons are also likely to be under 45 and more well off, but for dairy we don't see too much of a trend. And then, as I've already touched on, so as consumer confidence recovers, other factors such as health, the environment and animal welfare will become more of a priority for consumers. Next slide, please. And then looking at the levels of meat, fish and poultry non-avoiders. So this is a group of people who eat meat, fish and poultry regularly, but they don't claim any red meat reduction. So versus last year, this group has remained fairly stable. But the big change over the last 2 years has been growth in the number of people who have become flexitarian for cost reasons. So this has actually grown from 3.8% to 9.5% due to the cost of living crisis, so quite a big uplift there. And this is also why we've seen levels of people being flexitarian for non-cost reasons reduce. And then although cost is top of mind at present, we mustn't forget the reputational topics. So these are still important considerations for consumers, especially when purchasing red meat. So as price pressures ease, we are likely to see consumers sort of focus shift around these non-cost topics, so they will become more important. And then, so moving on to sort of the meal occasions on the next slide. So all meal occasions are actually in decline, but meals with meat are in decline less than meat-free meals. So this just shows that consumers do still want to eat meat, but they are reducing their meat consumption for cost reasons, just to try and save a bit of money. Now, in terms of meat-free meals, so these are meals that can include things like beans on toast or soup, rather than just purely meals with meat substitute products. Obviously, they are included. But actually, meat-free meals are in decline. So people are eating less food overall in order to save money. So that's the reason for the decline. And then overall, 43.1% of all main meals, so main meals are lunch and evening meal occasions. So 43.1% of all main meals contain no meat, This is down slightly from last year, but up from 42.5% in February 2020. And then, so these meat, fish, and poultry non-avoiders as well. So they're more engaged with meat-free meals at lunch. So this is due to soups and sandwiches being top lunch meals, so they lend themselves well to lunch. But actually at dinner, so these meat, fish, and poultry non-avoiders, this group is driving the overall growth in share of meat-based meals. So this once again just shows that consumers do still want to eat meat, and especially at dinner, because the share of occasions is growing. And on the next slide, we've got a comparison, just having a look at the difference in cost between the typical meals with or without meat. So really the key point here is that meat-free products are very similar in price to meat. So they don't really offer any kind of saving, unlike meals without meat, which come in at just £1.66 per meal. So that's a lot cheaper than both meat-free and meat meals. And then on the next slide, if you could click over, please. So we can see that vegan consumers are generally younger, vegetarians are middle-aged, and generally these meat, fish, and poultry non-avoiders are older. And so the majority of meat, fish, and poultry sales, as I've touched on, come from these older age groups, so the meat, fish, and poultry non-avoiders. So there's ongoing work that AHDB's marketing team are doing to help and sort of communicate to younger audiences the benefits of eating meat. And then you can hear a bit more from the marketing team a bit later as well. Next slide, please. And so on this slide, it's just a summary on the key points on meat reducers. So we do have an article on this on the AHDB website that you can have a read of. But just to summarize, so the levels of vegans remain stable, as is the levels of non-avoiders of meat, fish, and poultry. So it hasn't changed too much. The cost of living crisis has also meant that there are now more consumers who say they've reduced meat consumption and are flexitarians for cost reasons. And then looking at specific meals, so sandwiches at lunch have grown with flexitarians. So this is especially the case, obviously, because these meals can be made without meat, such as sandwiches with cheese. But looking at meat specifically, so this lends itself well to Italian meals. So there are opportunities here to increase Italian meals eaten by flexitarians, and then also non-avoiders as well. And then, as mentioned earlier, so reputational topics in the form of health, the environment, and British production and products, as well as animal welfare, are still important to these meat reducers, despite the fact they're reducing. So the wider industry and supply chain really should work together collectively on these key topics, because they are really important to consumers. So I'll now move on to having a look at red meat's performance within retail. So if you could just click on a couple slides, please. So then looking at red meat specifically, so for most proteins, volumes purchased have struggled due to the rising prices. So this is especially the case for beef and pork, as you can see on the table. So these have seen large year-on-year price rises, which I'll come into a bit. And it's also the reason why volumes have declined year-on-year. And so spend has actually grown for all proteins apart from meat-free, but it's inflation that's caused this value growth. And then on the table, you can obviously see that lamb has performed strongly over the last year. So we've seen a 2.9% year-on-year rise in lamb volumes for the 52 weeks ending the 12th of May. And this was led by its strong performance over Easter. So there was strong demand at Easter, which I'll touch on and come on to on the next slide. But just before this, so meat-free volumes, as you can see, have declined. So we've seen demand for meat-free products reduce recently. So people are turning to carbohydrates as well as cheese to create these tasty meatless meals, but at a lower cost. And actually this year we've seen less interest in veganuary, and retailers have given less shelf space to meat-free products as well. But just coming back to lamb's strong performance on the next slide. So for the 2 weeks leading up to Easter, lamb saw the largest year-on-year increase in volumes out of all proteins. So we can see that lamb volumes, I should say, grew by just less than 14% year on year. And so we saw large volumes switch from popular and cheap products such as whole chicken, wings, legs and thighs, as well as pork sausages. So again, this further shows the high demand for lamb at Easter. But lamb's strong performance was mainly driven by roasting joints, and this was specifically leg roasting joints, which again indicates the importance of eating lamb at a traditional Easter Sunday meal, and it's really something that consumers value. And so if you want any more information on this, you can have a look at our YouTube channel. So on the AHDB YouTube channel, we've got a video exploring the typical lamb shopper and also lamb's strong Easter performance in a bit more detail. But coming on to dairy on the next slide. So similar to meat, fish and poultry, so total cows dairy spend has grown due to inflation, but obviously this has not been mirrored in volumes over the last year. So since milk accounts for the majority of cows dairy volumes, and volumes of milk have declined for the 52-week ending 18th of May, this has actually driven the trend for the overall cows dairy category. So because of this, even though we've seen volume growth to cream, cheese and yogurt, this growth was actually outweighed by the declines to milk and butter. But just coming on to yogurt more specifically, so we can see it's had strong performance, so volumes grew by 5.1% year on year, and this was because we had more households purchasing yogurt and also purchasing it more frequently as well. And looking at the specific products within yogurt that have performed well, so healthy, standard flavored and fat-free yogurts all saw the largest year-on-year growth. And yogurt is also being used more within Indian meals, so specifically that's within curries such as biryani, and families are specifically driving some of this increase in usage. So they're finding that curries are actually tastier when they're using yogurt than without. Could you click on to the next slide? And then just click on again. Thank you. Cool. So as mentioned, so we've touched on the fact that consumer budgets are easing, but shoppers are still mindful of their spending. So demand for beef, pork and some dairy products has reduced. So it's because of this large increase to average prices, which you can see on the screen. But actually lamb's average price has still increased, but only by 1.7% year on year. So much less than all other proteins. And this is because supermarkets, so during the lead up to Easter, they had large volumes on promotion for roasting joints. And this was done to entice shoppers in, to get them purchasing more lamb. And so actually these large volumes on promotion, they actually limited the overall price increase, which is why it's just 1.7% year on year. And also this retailer strategy obviously worked because we did see lamb volumes grow over this period. And coming on to food service on the next slide. So despite a fall in penetration, the out-of-home market is continuing to grow. So this is driven by more engaged shoppers because we've seen the frequency of trips to the out-of-home market increase. Now, red meat volume growth was largely driven by more affordable channels in the dine-in and on-the-go options. So this overcompensated for a slight fall in takeaway volumes. And actually, even those consumers who are struggling financially, they've increased their spend out of home despite continuing trading down behaviours elsewhere. So this just shows really that consumers are still looking to food service to eat out. Now, both beef and pork have seen food service volumes decline in 2023 versus pre-COVID levels. So that's versus levels in 2019. But lamb's food service volumes are actually slightly up over this period compared to 2019. So they're slightly up in 2023, and this was driven by takeaways. But as I've said, because of this slow retail performance for pork and beef, this offset the food service growth. So we estimate that total volumes for pork and beef are in decline, unlike for lamb, which is in growth. And then just on my final slide, thank you. And so on my final slide, so there are some key opportunities here to boost red meat and dairy sales. So firstly, the industry needs to communicate the benefits of British production, sustainability and welfare, which can help justify any price premium that may exist when consumers are looking for quality products and when choosing products either online or in supermarkets, just choosing products in general. But for cheaper cut products, versatile dishes should be encouraged. So these can deliver on flavour but at an affordable price. So this can help entice shoppers to sort of purchase these cheaper cuts and products because it links in with cost-saving behaviours where these meals are affordable. And on the other side of the spectrum, so for more premium products, where we've seen meal occasions lost from more expensive products and the out-of-home market. So these can be recaptured by inspiring treat dinners within the home. So consumers can be inspired to recreate meals that they maybe usually get out of home when they go and eat within food service and actually recreate them in home, which again could end up being a bit cheaper as well, but may use these more premium products. We should also address health concerns. So they should be addressed, and consumers should be reassured by communicating the natural health benefits of meat and dairy. So for instance, that they're high in vitamin B12. And then we can also look to maintain and build consumer trust, demonstrating where farming values, so such as animal welfare, environmental stewardship, and expertise, where these values are also shared with consumers to help build that link in shared values with farmers and consumers. But that's it from me. So I'll now hand you over to Grace, who will go through the key events throughout the year for meat and dairy.
Thank you. I'll be looking at how important events are for meat and dairy and the opportunities at different occasions. We'll look at retail and food service sales, how consumer behaviour changes at these events, and what it all means for the supply chain and for farmers. So this comes from our Importance of Events report, which has been published on our website this morning. And so I'd really encourage you to go and have a look at that after the webinar. So research from IGT shows that 82% of shoppers who are hosting guests buy special food and drink for events. Groceries are an area where shoppers are less likely to stick to a strict budget, and some are going to splurge on treaty foods and drinks. Next slide, please. It probably comes as no surprise that Christmas is the biggest event for consumers, with 84% celebrating it and 82% having it within their top 3 most important events in the year. Perhaps surprisingly, birthdays are the second most popular event through the year. This is a bit more difficult to target than Christmas, as birthdays are spread through the year, but retailers or restaurants may have shoppers' birthday information, so offering personalised offers or deals could be an opportunity. Or data from the ONS suggests that September is the month with the most birthdays, so retailers and restaurants could consider more prominent birthday messaging during this month. We can also look at the meal occasions in home where shoppers are celebrating. Next slide, please. And those celebratory meals which we eat in the home are more likely to feature meat, fish, or poultry, but unfortunately not dairy. These are the names of how consumers can define their meals with Kantar, so romantic, planned, special. And those meals where people say they are eating for together time sees the greatest uplift in share for meat, fish, and poultry versus those for total food. This shows how important meat is when consumers are celebrating or sitting down to have a proper meal with their family, rather than other options like grabbing a quick bite or eating in front of the TV. Next slide. And of these meals where meat over-indexes, planned and together time have the biggest share of total meals, with special, celebration and romantic meals making up a surprisingly small proportion of meals in the home, with less than 1% of evening meals eaten for each of those reasons. This drops even further to at lunchtime, where they're even less likely to occur. This poses several opportunities to encourage consumers to have more of these types of occasions, to celebrate those small things, and to treat their significant other to a romantic home-cooked meal. There is also the option to not just save together time for the evening meal, but encourage families to sit down together for a lunchtime roast. Next slide. Within our analysis of the Kantar and Nielsen sales data, we've identified 10 key events through the year for meat and dairy categories. Within the first half of the year, we have events like Easter, which gives a boost to all categories, and Valentine's Day, where the picture is more mixed. Here on this slide, the colour coding green indicates where categories over-index for sales, and we see sales higher than the average 2 weeks excluding Christmas, and the orange is where sales are lower than average. Next slide, please. Then these are the further 5 events which we analysed. So we looked at events in 2023 and there were some insightful learnings from the King's coronation, which could apply to other similar events in the future or more bank holidays. Surprisingly, Father's Day struggled, while Christmas is the second event where we see all categories over-index alongside Easter. And that will come as no surprise that Christmas was the biggest event for most categories. Next slide. As you can see here, Christmas is the biggest event for beef, pork and dairy, while Easter was the biggest event for lamb, although Christmas is a close second, and this means that lamb sees the biggest share of retail sales around these events, with 40% of sales falling within the 18 weeks which we analysed. Roasting joints are the go-to for Easter, and we see a huge over-index of these with lamb, with roasting joints in particular being popular. For beef, again, we see roasting joints perform well, but this time at Christmas. Larger gathering sizes are seen for meals which contain beef over the Christmas period, and on average, shoppers purchase larger roasting joints at Christmas than they do for the rest of the year. Looking at pork, gammon sees the biggest uplift at Christmas, but pies and pastries also see uplift as shoppers purchase party foods like sausage rolls for Christmas celebrations. For dairy, a category which we call other cow's cream sees the biggest over-index, and this category includes flavoured and alcoholic creams, which we only really see at Christmas. There could be an opportunity to see how we could expand these options into other events. Stilton and British blue cheese also see significant uplifts at Christmas as consumers prepare cheese boards and also potentially some cheese gifting. We don't have time in the webinar to go through all the detail in all of these events, but I'm just going to run through a couple of slides, some highlights from the report. As one of the first bank holidays of the year, Easter is seen by many as a chance for family and friends to get together and celebrate. Although it's the school holidays, we still see 8 out of 10 households spending most of the long weekend at their home or that of a close relative, with Easter being a strong family-centric event where we're focused around spending quality time together. As it coincides with the school holidays, this means that more meals are eaten at home rather than at work or school, and therefore we see uplifts across all of the categories. There was a 3% uplift for beef, and this was driven by roasting joints, where volumes purchased more than double compared to the average 2-week period. Retailers supported this with strong promotional activity, particularly loyalty pricing. But the ever-shifting date of Easter means that Easter weather one year can be very different from the next. And when Easter coincides with warmer weather, we naturally see some shoppers going towards more barbecue options. This can be a positive for beef volumes, but it could also be an issue for carcass balance if fewer roasting joints are sold, and it can be detrimental for lamb. The traditional roast is heavily associated with Easter, and as we saw on the previous slide, lamb roasting joints see the greatest volume purchase at this time of year. Lamb also sees uplifts in the out-of-home market in the run-up to Easter, particularly for roast dinners. We have seen lamb losing its place on menus, so ensuring that it has adequate menu share over Easter is an opportunity. There is also an uplift in pork sales at Easter, and it's an event not to be overlooked for pork. The majority of the uplift at Easter comes through leg roasting joints and gammon, despite pork being much less promoted than beef and lamb. Easter is the second biggest occasion for bacon behind Christmas, with the potential for more fry-ups with those extra days off work and school. The only area of processed pork not to see an uplift was sliced cooked meats, School holidays around Easter could mean fewer lunch boxes, which could explain the drop in ham sales. However, children still need lunch in the holidays, so reminding parents that lamb is a quick and easy option. The majority of dairy categories see seasonal uplift at Easter, with notable growth for butter and cream. Increase in baking and hot cross bun consumption could be behind the uplift in butter sales, while focus on indulgence rather than health boost sales for double, single and whipping cream. Next slide, please. While data from Kantar doesn't show an uplift in retail volumes purchased during Ramadan and Eid, wholesale data and the deadweight lamb price movement suggest that these events do have significant impacts on the lamb supply chain. Meat remains central to many Muslim diets, and lamb is of particular cultural importance. Despite accounting for just 6% of the population, AHDB estimates that Muslims account for nearly 20% of lamb volume sales, and over a third claim to be increasing their consumption of halal lamb. This is from a piece of research that we've done recently with the Smithfield Collective on halal consumers, and we hope to have those full findings available on our website in the next few months. Therefore, catering to these events for farmers, the supply chain and retailers is an opportunity for the future. Qurbani is another key Muslim festival where many buy a whole lamb, and prices for supplying this event can be much higher than the standard market price. If you are interested in some of these different events, I would encourage you to look at the resources that we have available on our website. Next slide, please. The event that we're currently in is summer, so I thought I'd give you some highlights from this. Summertime in 2023 was a bit of a washout and under-indexed compared to the average, but we can hope for better weather this year and therefore more sales of barbecue staples. This year we also have the Euros and the Olympics, which we hope will give a boost to sales. However, it's worth a reminder that summers can be too hot, and we have seen this in the past where consumers don't want to be cooking outside over an open fire. We would expect beef to see uplifts around barbecues. Beef's best performance over summer coincides with the best of the weather. Gatherings with 5 or more people peak during the summer season for beef, and we see a decrease in meals being classed as planned compared to the average. So there's an opportunity for retailers to capitalise on these unplanned events when the sun shines, making sure that they have stock in when everyone rushes to buy burgers. Total lamb under-indexes over summer, but processed lamb over-indexes, showing lamb could see a boost in summer. Lamb koftas and burgers are popular, but we could expand consumers' options for lamb into steaks or diced cuts on the barbecue. Lean into messaging around taste and enjoyment, as these are key drivers for shoppers when purchasing lamb. The summer is often a highlight season for pork, especially when the sun is shining. Pork sales tend to peak in the early summer around the end of May or start of June. Classic barbecue products which saw uplifts include sausages, marinades, and pork ribs. Pork pies and pastries also saw uplifts in the summer, potentially due to more pork snacking foods like Scotch egg, pork pies, and quiches. However, pork burgers under-index at this time, showing that there's an opportunity to remind shoppers about pork options beyond your standard sausage. Poor weather last year limited demand for products such as cheese due to fewer barbecues and therefore fewer burgers and salads. However, demand for cream, yogurt and butter was elevated. We could see, with warm sunny weather this year, we would expect to see a spike in dairy volumes. Sales of ice cream through the summer peak when the good weather coincides with school holidays. Retailers can tie in dairy promotions and inspiration to major sporting events this summer, as consumers may be inspired by Wimbledon or the Paris Olympics. And messaging could tie in with this, highlighting the great health benefits of milk and yogurt, and that's something we're working on at AHDB, and Carrie will go into more detail later. Next slide, please. So what does this mean for farmers? Throughout the report on our website, we have linked back what these events mean for the supply chain. Events play an important role for producers, driving demand both domestically and abroad. The demand peaks have various implications for the market, and knowing when these times are can help you with your planning. And while supply chains effectively respond to seasonal demand flows, there are some potential opportunities which farmers could take advantage of, like seasonal trends in pricing. For example, cull cow prices tend to see support through the spring and summer, as there is a seasonal reduction in supply, but also improved demand at barbecue season, which pushes prices up and could be a good time to sell. However, it's also important to do what's best for your farm, analysing your farm business to see if lambing earlier or later to meet Easter, Qurbani or Christmas demand is going to be profitable. Also, selling when product is ready is always going to be best. Knowing what the market requires is one of the characteristics of our top performing farms in 2024, which is a piece of analysis from our economics team, which is also now available on our website. Next slide. Just another reminder that all of the extra information for all of the events is available now on our website. So I'd encourage you to go and have a look. So now we know that events are important, but they're not the only opportunity, and there is the rest of the weeks in the year to consider as well. This is our outlook for 2024, where we predict that beef, milk and cheese will see growth year on year. And despite positive Easter, we do expect to see declines for lamb and also for pork. Full details of our agri-market outlook, not just looking at demand, but also supply and trade, again, available on our website. So this shows that events are not the only important weeks, and that's one of the reasons why AHDB runs marketing campaigns. So I'm going to hand over to Carrie now.
Hello, I'm Carrie, Head of Marketing, and I'm here to talk through how we translate the insights from the Marketing Intelligence team, which you've just seen, into targeted consumer campaigns. Next slide, please. But first, let me take you back to 1826. It was the year that the French lawyer coined the phrase, "You are what you eat." And never has this been more true, with battle lines being drawn around those that enjoy British meat and dairy and those that don't. It's why we run campaigns to help counter the misinformation and protect consumer attitudes to British beef, lamb, pork and dairy. Next slide, please. And to do this, as Grace has highlighted, there are timely points and events in the year which we punctuate with activity, such as barbecue, Christmas, World Milk Day or the Olympics, to name but a few. And here is the date for the next Great British Beef Week. Love Lamb Week also kicks off on the 1st of September. Ultimately, all of this is with a long-term view, and AHDB are uniquely placed on behalf of the industry to help promote the long-term future of our categories and positively influence consumer attitudes around the area of reputation. Next slide, please. So strategically, our role is to add value back to businesses and to promote to consumers the great products our farmers produce. And we do this in 4 simple steps. First, we work closely with our market intelligence colleagues to gather data and insight, and we always start with the end user, the consumer, in mind. And we use this to identify the big opportunities which we translate into the marketing plan. And then we activate the plan across the supply chain, from farmers to supermarkets. Because when we do this and everyone's involved, we tend to see the biggest returns on retail sales. And we will also pivot where necessary and focus on key points in the year, but ultimately AHDB can serve our levy payers by helping in the space of reputation. Next slide, please. So our aim is to accelerate positive attitudinal change, and we use independent evidence such as insight to drive collaborative action. So the marketing team launch a campaign on average every 7 weeks, and we underpin these campaigns with a positive drumbeat of messaging and are always on social media. And we collaborate with processing retailers to activate these campaigns in store and provide the insight to drive a change in the way products are presented on the fixture. Currently, we're working with IGD on how retailers can optimise and present British products in the meat aisle. Our education team also help upskill teachers to be able to give students the chance to understand where their food comes from and also develop the important life skill of cooking. And recently they've launched a number of successful campaigns and pilots, such as A-level resources, on-farm school conference, and supporting farmers to deliver school farm visits. So working in collaboration, we can build impact and scale and also challenge misinformation on behalf of the industry. So our Let's Eat Balanced campaign is one of our flagship, So we also focus on key events throughout the year with 24 million impressions. That's the amount of time the content appears on consumer phones to punctuate the year with key campaign messaging. And there are a couple of examples there. Next slide, please. Our Let's Eat Balanced campaign is one of our flagship activities. It aims to promote British meat and dairy as part of a healthy and balanced diet. And our last campaign reached 47 million adults. And 7 out of 10 consumers in research told us that the campaign gave them new information that they could use to defend their dietary choices. So thanks to all the processors and retailers who helped us sticker over 15 million packs with Let's Eat Balanced stickers. And importantly, the latest evaluation we've undertaken with Kantar demonstrated that the campaign delivered £10 of retail sales for every £1 we invested. Next slide, please. It's frozen on my screen. Oh, there we go. So we also use an independent research agency to quantify the impact of the campaign on consumer attitudes. And we do this by asking consumers a set of questions before we kick off the campaign and after. And the campaign drove some nice significant uplifts across a blend of nutrition and production standards came through, and also naturalness. And the great news is that the latest campaign that we launched in January, This and That, also drove more significant results. Next slide, please. So the Pork Feed Your Family for Less campaign inspires consumers to see pork as an affordable, tasty and healthy meal option. And with the challenges on cost of living, many consumers are looking for more budget-friendly options in the meat aisle. The core campaign targeted a family audience and showcased the great value and versatility of pork with a range of affordable recipes that are healthy too. Next slide, please. So also using a consistent way of measuring campaigns, we also had pre and post evaluation, and we achieved significant uplifts across a range of key metrics such as nutrition, versatile and good value for money. And purchase intent was also at its highest for 4 years. Next slide, please. Our PR campaigns also utilise key moments in the year to communicate the role of meat and dairy in a healthy diet. So during the World Cup, we launched the Eat Like a Lioness campaign, and we ran a survey which found that 40% of girls playing football are restricting food groups in their diets, and our aim was to promote a balanced diet. So 140 national publications ran the story with a combined reach of 500 million. We also have an exciting new campaign coming for the Olympics, which demonstrates how meat and dairy can empower the next generation of young athletes. Next slide, please. So we will continue to champion British beef, lamb, pork and dairy at key moments of the year and underpin this with a positive drumbeat of content all year round. Our new Olympics campaign will be out on the 12th of July, demonstrating meat and dairy's role for young athletes and empowering the next generation. So our ask is please collaborate and share our content to reach more consumers. Thank you.
So thank you so much for our speakers today. As I'm sure you appreciate, there's absolutely loads of content that we've covered in that session, but there's also lots of content behind the scenes that we wouldn't have had a chance to cover in this kind of 45-minute wrap up. What I would sort of say is there's lots of content on our website to go and delve a little deeper. You can sign up for our newsletter online, and that comes out every other month. And if there's been any particular questions that have come up or further insight, we're always on board for kind of new insight ideas or what people would love to know about the consumers. So feel free to drop that on an email to us at strategic.insight at ahdb.org.uk. And we just want to say a big thank you for spending the time sort of like joining us on today's webinar, but also to being interested in those kind of retail and consumer trends, and we look forward to spending more sort of sessions online over the coming year, but also feel free to contact us or a member of the team if there's any things that you'd like to get more information on. So thank you very much for tuning in and listening. Have a good rest of your day.